Biggest aircraft carrier, USS Gerald R. Ford. The USS Gerald R. Ford is not a ship in any sense that the word ordinarily implies. It is a floating military installation, a sovereign piece of American territory that moves, capable of projecting air power to any ocean on Earth within days of leaving port. At 1,106 feet long and displacing over 100,000 metric tons, it is the largest warship ever built. Its flight deck covers 4.5 acres. It carries up to 75 aircraft. Its 2 nuclear reactors generate enough power to run a small city, and they do so for 20 years without refueling. The Ford class introduced electromagnetic launch systems, replacing the steam catapults that had flung aircraft off carrier decks for decades, launching planes with more control, more speed, and less mechanical strain than anything before it. An aircraft carrier does not win wars by itself. What it does is make every other military asset around it more effective by being there. A mobile airbase that cannot be surrounded, cannot be blockaded, and arrives without asking permission to use anyone else's territory. Biggest tank, Panzer VIII Maus. The Maus was the logical conclusion of an illogical idea. If armor protection determines battlefield survival, the Germans reasoned in the middle of the Second World War, then more armor must mean more survival. The result was a machine weighing 188 metric tons, so heavy that it could not cross most bridges in Europe without destroying them, so wide it barely fit inside the railway gauge used to transport it, so slow its top speed of 12 miles per hour made it a fixed target for any aircraft that found it. 2 prototypes were built and neither saw combat. The Maus was so large and heavy that crossing a river normally was impossible. Instead, it had to drive along the riverbed underwater, breathing through an air hose connected to the tank. The engine could not generate enough power to drive the tracks and the turret simultaneously, so the crew chose one or the other. It represented the absolute limit of what a tank could be before the concept of a tank collapsed entirely under its own ambition. Biggest submarine, Typhoon class. The Typhoon class submarine is so large that Russian sailors who served aboard called it the Shark, and the name was not affectionate, it was accurate. Built during the Cold War as the Soviet Union's ultimate nuclear deterrent, the Typhoon measures 574 feet in length and displaces 48,000 metric tons when submerged, making it nearly twice the displacement of any American submarine. It carried 20 ballistic missiles, each capable of delivering multiple nuclear warheads independently to targets thousands of miles apart. The interior was designed for extended patrols that could last months. A swimming pool, a sauna, a common room with plants and birds, kept to maintain crew morale during deployments that never surfaced. The engineering required to build a pressure hull of that size, capable of surviving the depths it operated at, pushed Soviet submarine construction to limits it had never approached before. 6 were built. Most were scrapped in the years following the Soviet collapse, some with financial assistance from the United States as part of arms reduction agreements. The last of the class, Dmitry Donskoy, was decommissioned in February 2023 after more than 4 decades of service. The ocean it once patrolled handed over to smaller, quieter, more modern successors that the world will never see coming. Plans are now underway to preserve it as a museum ship in St. Petersburg, a Cold War giant coming to rest in the city it was built to defend. Biggest hovercraft, Zubr class. Most military landing craft approach a beach slowly, load troops cautiously, and hope the surf cooperates. The Zubr class does none of these things. It is the largest military hovercraft ever built, measuring 187 feet in length and capable of carrying 3 main battle tanks or up to 500 troops across open water at 60 knots. Faster than most patrol boats, across water, across beach, and directly onto land without stopping. It rides on a cushion of air generated by 5 enormous propellers, which means it is not limited to beaches with gradual gradients. It can come ashore across 73% of the world's coastline, compared to roughly 15% accessible to conventional landing craft. The noise it generates on approach is enormous, the spray it throws is blinding, and by the time a defending force has fully registered what is arriving, it has already arrived. Russia built several. Ukraine operated some before the war. China purchased 2 and studied them carefully. Biggest artillery gun, Schwerer Gustav. The Schwerer Gustav was built to destroy something specific, the Maginot Line, the elaborate French fortification system that conventional artillery could not penetrate. It was a railway gun, a barrel 106 feet long, firing shells weighing 7 metric tons, mounted on a carriage so massive it required 2 parallel railway tracks to support it. The complete assembly stretched nearly 1,500 feet when deployed, weighed 1,350 metric tons, and required a crew of over 2,500 soldiers to operate and defend. It fired a shell capable of penetrating 28 feet of reinforced concrete. It took weeks to transport to a firing position and days to assemble once it arrived. In practice, it destroyed several targets of significance during the siege of Sevastopol, but was captured by no one. The Germans destroyed it themselves to prevent it falling into Allied hands. It was the largest artillery piece ever used in combat. It was also one of the least practical weapons ever built. A machine so enormous and so specialized that the problem it was designed to solve had changed by the time it was ready to solve it. Biggest helicopter. MiL Mi-26. Everything about the MiL Mi-26 runs out of comparisons quickly because no other helicopter comes close enough to compare. It is the largest and most powerful production helicopter ever built, a machine capable of lifting 20 metric tons of cargo internally, or slung beneath its fuselage on a hook. Its 8-blade rotor spans 105 feet, wider than the wingspan of a fully loaded Boeing 737. It has been used to transport other helicopters that have broken down in remote locations. It carried a frozen mammoth carcass out of Siberian permafrost for scientific study. Russian military and civilian operations both depend on it for moving equipment into terrain that no fixed-wing aircraft can reach and no ground vehicle can access. The engineering required to build a rotor system capable of generating lift at that scale, while remaining controllable and reliable across decades of service, places the Mi-26 in a category that no other manufacturer has seriously attempted to challenge. Biggest battleship, Yamato. Japan built the Yamato knowing it could not win the war it was building it for. The United States outproduced Japan in ships, aircraft, and carriers by margins that no single vessel could overcome. The answer Japan chose was to build the one ship that nothing afloat could sink, a battleship so heavily armored, so massively gunned, so overwhelming in its presence that it might change the mathematics of a war that the mathematics had already decided. At 863 feet long and 72,000 metric tons fully loaded, it was the heaviest battleship ever built. Its main guns fired shells weighing 1.4 metric tons to targets 26 miles away. Its armor belt was over 16 inches thick. It fired those guns in anger exactly once, at the battle off Samar, and left without the victory it was sent to secure. The aircraft found it months later. 11 torpedoes and 6 bombs ended it. The Yamato never achieved what it was built for, not because it wasn't powerful enough, but because the war had already moved into a dimension where its power did not apply. Biggest bomber, Tu-160 Blackjack. The Tu-160 is the largest combat aircraft ever built, a supersonic strategic bomber that entered Soviet service in 1987 and remains in Russian service today, updated and still flying. It weighs 275 metric tons at maximum takeoff weight, carries up to 40 metric tons of weapons internally, and reaches speeds exceeding Mach 2 at altitude. Its variable sweep wings shift between spread for low-speed cruise and swept back for supersonic dash, a geometry that lets the same aircraft operate efficiently across a vast range of flight profiles. Russian crews call it the White Swan, an incongruous name for a machine designed to carry nuclear weapons across intercontinental distances. Production restarted in the 2000s after a gap of decades, new aircraft joining the fleet alongside the original airframes that have been flying for nearly 40 years. It remains the heaviest and fastest bomber in operational service anywhere in the world. Biggest fighter aircraft. Tupolev Tu-128 Fiddler. The Tu-128 was not built for dogfighting. It was built for a problem that only the Soviet Union had, an Arctic frontier so vast and so remote that no conventional fighter could patrol it meaningfully. At 98 feet long and weighing over 43 metric tons fully loaded, the Tu-128 was closer in size to a medium bomber than anything ordinarily called a fighter. It needed that size because it needed the fuel to reach the distant corners of Soviet airspace where American bombers might appear, and it needed the airframe to carry the enormous radar and the 4 massive air-to-air missiles that were its only weapons. It had no gun. It had no ability to maneuver in close combat. It was a missile platform with wings designed to find a bomber at long range, fire, and turn for home before it ran out of fuel over the Arctic. It entered service in 1961 and remained the largest fighter aircraft ever to enter operational service anywhere in the world, a title it still holds today, a record set not by ambition, but by the sheer geographic scale of the problem it was built to solve. Biggest wheeled military vehicle, MAZ-7907. The MAZ-7907 was built for one purpose, carrying Soviet intercontinental ballistic missiles from storage to launch position across terrain that would defeat any conventional vehicle. It rode on 12 axles, carrying 24 wheels, measured 114 feet in length, and weighed 360 metric tons fully loaded. Each wheel was driven by its own electric motor, powered by a gas turbine engine mounted on the vehicle. The same diesel-electric principle used in locomotives applied to a road vehicle of extraordinary scale. It could carry a payload of 220 metric tons. It turned by articulating its entire frame in sections because conventional steering at that scale is mechanically impossible. Only 2 were ever built. They were never used operationally. The missile systems they were designed to carry were replaced before the vehicles entered service. They exist now as artifacts of a Cold War logic that demanded machines of a scale the world had never seen for a war that was never fought. Biggest proposed tank. Landkreuzer P-1000 Rata. The Maus was too big to be practical. The Rata was too big to exist. If the Maus at 188 metric tons was already an absurdity, the Rata proposed to be more than 5 times heavier at 1,000 metric tons, longer than a football field, taller than a 2-story building, a machine that made the largest tank ever built look modest by comparison. Proposed by German engineers in 1942 and briefly considered by Hitler before being cancelled in 1943, the Landkreuzer P-1000 Rata existed only on paper, but what the paper described was a machine of genuinely staggering ambition. It would have weighed 1,000 metric tons, stretched 115 feet in length, and carried a turret housing 2 naval guns borrowed from a battleship. It would have required its own power grid to move. It would have been visible from miles away, immovable by any bridge ever built, and destroyable by any aircraft that found it. It was cancelled not because the engineering was impossible, but because anyone who thought about it for long enough understood that building it would be less a military achievement than a target. The Rata never moved, it never fired, it never existed outside the drawings, and yet it remains the most extreme single expression of the idea that a machine could be made large enough to be unstoppable, an idea the Maus had already proven wrong. Biggest military drone, RQ-4 Global Hawk. Every other machine on this list was built to project force. The Global Hawk was built to see. At 47 feet long with a wingspan of 130 feet, larger than a Boeing 737, the RQ-4 is the largest military drone in operational service, designed to fly at 60,000 feet for up to 34 hours without landing, watching everything below it with sensors that can distinguish objects inches apart from altitudes where the aircraft itself is invisible. It carries no weapons, it carries cameras, radar systems, and signals intelligence equipment that feed a continuous picture of the battlefield to commanders who may be continents away. The Global Hawk represents a different kind of military power than anything else on this list. Not the power to destroy or to carry or to withstand, but the power to know. In modern warfare, that knowledge is often what determines the outcome before the first shot is fired.